Get Rich Education is brought to you by Ridge Lending Group and Corporate Direct.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
Welcome to Get Rich Education, episode 161. Hi, I'm Keith Weinhold, and before we talk with Rich Dad Advisor Garrett Sutton about protecting your assets today, I've got a strange kind of question for you. What makes you weird? Yeah, think about that. I want to know what it is that you think makes you weird compared to others, and I potentially want you to embrace that thing that's weird about you. That distinctive behavior that sets you apart, that makes you abnormal. You really might just want to embrace that because you see, being wealthy is abnormal itself. I want you to dig out what is inside of you that is both weird and good. Maybe I can help you do that if I just open up and give you some examples of what I think makes me weird, okay? If I think about the things that have had the most positive influence on my life and the lives of others, they stand out as the actions that are bold and really that are weird. For example, more than 15 years ago, I moved away from my home state of Pennsylvania, where I lived my entire life. And that's a place that I guess a lot of people would consider a kind of normal place to live. And I moved to Anchorage, Alaska, because I had vacationed in Anchorage 4 times previously, and I felt like Anchorage best fit my interests. Well, that was extremely weird to friends and others in Pennsylvania. When they heard that I was moving to Anchorage, Alaska, they acted like they thought I was attempting to colonize the planet Mars or something. Well, that weirdness, that created happiness because I went for what I wanted. Then after moving to Anchorage, I had been a rent-paying tenant all my life. And when it was time for me to buy my first home, you know this story, instead of buying a single-family home or a condo, I made my first home a 4-plex building where I lived in 1 unit and rented out the other 3. So one day, August 8th, 2002, I was a rent-paying tenant, and the very next day, I owned an entire 4-unit building, and I was the one collecting the rent on August 9th, 2002. Again, pretty weird, pretty abnormal, and one of the best things that I ever did, as that was the genesis of a real estate investing interest, which led me to financial freedom. Again, pretty weird. Then in October of 2014, I did a third thing that was pretty weird. Okay, I had been an employee in the engineering field for quite a while, and as a job worker, I found that employees that worked around the building there, my workplace, they were increasingly visiting my office to learn about investing in real estate. Even employees that worked on different floors that I had never met previously, these people wanted to come down to my office and know, how does this everyday employee get $3,000, then $4,000, then $5,000 and more in monthly income without working for it? And doing these friendly one-on-ones with people soon wasn't scalable. So at that time, I went home and I spent 30 minutes talking about this stuff. I talked into a $60 USB microphone plugged into the side of an everyday Hewlett-Packard laptop that rested on my wife and I's Anchorage, Alaska dining room table. Yeah, that's exactly how this show right here began. That was episode number 1 of Get Rich Education, which you can still listen to today from October 10th, 2014, in fact. So again, a pretty weird activity there, way out of the norm. Well, often what makes you weird is what makes you interesting, and that's what makes you successful. Your friends might think it's weird that you live in California and buy turnkey real estate in Memphis. Your coworkers might think it's weird that you live in New York and you have cash flowing income property in Alabama. Owning parcels of coffee trees in Panama? What? Totally out of the norm. Yet others invest in stocks, and those people don't even know what state the company headquarters is in, or when or where the corporate shareholder meetings even take place. And what else do those people have? Mutual funds invested with T. Rowe Price? Oh, jeez. A 401k invested in the Vanguard S&P 500 index? Oh, my gosh. Well, that's normal. And normal is unspectacular, it's limiting, and as we often say, it probably yields a rate of return of less than zero, accounting for the inflation and the emotion and the taxes and the fees and the volatility. So I want to have nothing to do with normal. What does normal mean? I mean, normal, that might mean overweight, undernourished, underslept, not having enough money at the end of the month. That's normal. Well, why should anyone want that? So remember to celebrate what makes you weird and think about what other aspirational action you can take that, proves that you're kind of weird. Last week, my wife and I returned from the New Orleans Investment Conference in New Orleans, Louisiana. Top-notch speakers and world-class content delivered there. Speakers like Doug Casey, Peter Schiff, Robert Kiyosaki, and Tucker Carlson all presented. And so did the real estate guys, Robert Helms and Russell Gray. Maybe I'll give you some more takeaways from the conference later, but we just have so much to get to today. But be sure to check out the Real Estate Guys podcast if you haven't. Again, it's just called The Real Estate Guys. I spent a good bit of time hanging out with them and also with the International Coffee Farms people as they each had booths there. Thank you for coming to New Orleans to meet me in person like so many of you did. I've got to say, I was a little overwhelmed and even disbelieving as a few of you even told me that you came there principally to meet me and that the conference was even secondary for you. I just never would have thought such a thing. Just amazing. Maybe next time I go to an event like that, I should set up a meet and greet session or have my own booth or something, but I got into a lot of conversations with many of you. I think about some good chats I had with Christy and with Maheen and so many others where you've told me that this show has changed your life. I am just genuinely overwhelmed with the listener support out there. You know, back about 2 months ago on the Belize Cacao Tour, every attendee on that tour, except for one, was a GRE listener. So I just continue to be amazed and impressed with what you're doing. So keep doing me proud by embracing weird activities like me. One cool thing to announce is that a couple weeks ago, I was named as the newest writer for Forbes magazine. And I'm also the newest member of the Forbes Real Estate Council. So I should have a chance to reach even more of you that way. I'm also pleased to tell you that my Amazon best-selling book, it's called 7 Money Myths That Are Killing Your Wealth Potential. It was released back in June, and that's now available to you for free in the ebook version. Yes, I've set things up so that you can now get the e-version of 7 Money Myths completely free. All you have to do is go to getricheducation.com/book, and you can get the free electronic version. And it is designed to be a lean, quick, easy read at just 80 pages. There are all these money myths out there. Like, for example, getting your money to work for you will make you wealthy. That's a myth, and 6 other myths get debunked for you. And I also tell you how to make this information actionable, but the book really starts out in the beginning with growing your expansionary mindset. Again, that ebook in its entirety is now free at getricheducation.com/book. And if you like it enough that you want the paperback, you can still get that hard copy version on Amazon. I think the price is really low there. So, there is a little cost for printing and such for that paperback version. Next week on the show, we're going to talk here with a fellow real estate investor. And just keep in mind that I don't necessarily agree with every strategy and tactic that every guest practices here. For example, I favor keeping higher leverage, high mortgage loan balances, and the asset protection safety of low equity positions rather than racing to pay down a loan and grinding to do that myself. So instead of using a loan pay down dollar myself, I'd rather let tenants and inflation destroy my debt for me and use my dollar instead to invest in more leveraged cash flowing real estate or just to increase my lifestyle. Inflation transfers wealth from lenders to borrowers, and inflation has been taking place for generations in the U.S., and inflation redistributes wealth from lenders to borrowers. So I want to be a borrower of long-term fixed interest rate debt because as smart strategic debt, see both tenants and inflation erode away that debt for us. Well, it's been just about annually that we've caught up with Garrett Sutton to make sure we're up to date with our asset protections and our legal structures. We're going to be talking about limited liability companies today and about some law change. Garrett and I are two of the very few people that each write for the Rich Dad Advisors, and we've each climbed the highest point in the state of Nevada. That is a fact, and maybe, again, a little weird, right? So remember to embrace the weird. If you're highly successful in anything, you're pretty likely to be a few standard deviations away from the norm. Mark Twain is famously credited with the quote, "Whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it is time to pause and reflect." That is Mark Twain. So what makes you weird? Whatever it is, you may very well want to embrace it. I'm going to grab a cold brewed Panama coffee from International Coffee Farms, and then we're coming right back with Rich Dad Advisor Garrett Sutton.
Garrett Sutton here, Robert Kiyosaki's asset protection attorney and the author of Loopholes of Real Estate. As an American or foreign-based investor in U.S. real estate, you know we are a litigious society. You know that you need to protect your real estate and paper asset holdings with the right mix of LLCs and corporations. My firm, Corporate Direct, not only forms these entities, but importantly, we properly maintain them too. If you fail to follow the corporate formalities, you can lose it all in an instant. Corporate Direct is your source for LLC protection and maintenance in all 50 states. Visit corporatedirect.com or call 800-600-1760. Mention Get Rich Education for a free bonus. Switch your resident agent service to us and receive another bonus. It's all good. We look forward to assisting you at corporatedirect.com.
Cash flow real estate investors, if you're looking for a mortgage loan with a company that specializes in investment property loans, it's Ridge Lending Group. They provide income property loans in almost every U.S. state. Ridge has worked with tens of thousands of investors and homeowners all over the country. In fact, with ethics and transparency, they've helped more people realize their dreams through real estate investing than any other mortgage lender in the country. Get started at ridgelendinggroup.com.
Hey everybody, this is Matt Bowles from Maverick Investor Group. You're listening to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, and don't quit your daydream.
Today's guest is the Rich Dad legal advisor, and he's also been the author of just so many incredibly well-received books, both inside and outside of the Rich Dad series. You know, one of my personal favorites is his book, Loopholes of Real Estate. That's available on Amazon. And that's actually one of the books on my small list of recommended reads, which you can find at getricheducation.com/read, R-E-A-D. I want to give a big Get Rich Education welcome back to this guest's third show appearance here over the years. It's Rich Dad Advisor Garrett Sutton.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks for having me on today. And it's a pleasure to be with you and your listeners to talk about some new rules that people need to be aware of.
Yeah, this stuff changes, and you're the person that keeps us updated on this. So, Garrett, before we update the listeners on how to best keep themselves protected, tell us some more about just what you do today.
Well, I continue to work with Robert Kiyosaki and the Rich Dad Advisor team. 2 months ago, we were in Paraguay and Argentina teaching financial education to the good people in South America. And there's a hunger for it in South America, in Australia, wherever we go. People want to learn these fundamental principles. So it's really rewarding to be able to travel the world with Robert Kiyosaki and provide this kind of information to people. As well, I am based here in Reno, Nevada, and we set up corporations and LLCs for people in the United States and those people from outside the U.S. that want to invest in the United States. So I get to talk to people from all over the world, Keith, and that for me is really enjoyable as well, just seeing what people are doing and how they're taking steps to improve their financial future.
You have such a big platform. Regardless of what country you're in, Real estate investors, we commonly make mistakes when we're looking to protect our assets. Maybe for some people, they're more involved with the chase and the thrill of the deal. I can totally understand that, but you need to protect your downside at the same time. So what are some of those common real estate investor mistakes when it comes to protecting their assets?
Well, a common mistake, Keith, is that at the start, you figure you don't have a lot of assets, and maybe you'll form that LLC a little later. And then, you get involved in the crush of commerce and you forget to do so. And then if you get sued, this property is in your individual name and you're not only exposed to the risk against the property, but if they get a judgment, all of your personal assets are exposed. And so by taking these steps early on, when you buy that first property, you need to have title in the name of an LLC to be protected rather than waiting and perhaps forgetting to do so. The second mistake we see, Keith, is that people will form the LLC. That's great. But then they forget to transfer title into the name of the LLC. So right. Start, maybe you take title in the name of Keith and you forget to put it into the name of Keith's LLC. That is a common mistake. So it's a two-step process. You've got to form that LLC right at the start, but then you also have to transfer title from your name into the LLC. And that's not a sale. You haven't sold anything. You're just transferring how the title is held. So it's not a taxable event. It's not a problem with the banks. So, you should really take that second step as well to be fully protected.
That's important. You can't just set up the LLC. You need to appropriately transfer title in order to be protected. Now, here at Get Rich Education, we talk about buy and hold real estate investing, and sometimes we have people out there that want to be more active in their flippers, but oftentimes over the long term, Garrett, a flipper learns that they want to put more things in their buy and hold portfolio. That's where we get a better return on time invested. What if we have an investor that's out there doing both active flipping and passive buy and holds? Are there some things to keep in mind with asset protection with that in mind?
Absolutely. Great question. The first thing is you don't want to have a buy and hold property in the same entity that you're doing flips with. All right. You can get sued on a flip. A contractor could sue you. Someone else could be suing. And so that is a riskier activity in my mind than buy and hold real estate. So we want to segregate assets and activities. You would have one LLC for the holds and maybe one or more, because we don't want to put 10 properties in one LLC and expose the equity of all 10 properties against one claim. Secondly, when you're doing the flips, you'll work with your CPA, but typically you're going to have an LLC taxed as an S corporation. With the S corp taxation, we can minimize any payroll taxes that may be due because it's a trader business if you're flipping properties. So those are some of the key things to know. We're not going to put hold properties in with flip properties. And we want to have the right taxation for our flips because it is a trader business. If it's taxed as an LLC, the regulations say all money flowing through a business operating LLC are subject to payroll taxes. Well, payroll taxes go for Social Security. We know that we're not going to see all that money that we're putting into the Social Security system. There's just no way they can pay it.
Right.
So you want to minimize your payroll taxes. You got to follow the law, but we want to legally minimize payroll taxes. We don't want to pay more into the system than we have to. And the S corporation taxation allows you to do that. So those would be two key points for your flippers.
Yes, pay more into Social Security than you absolutely have to. Definitely not a good ROI for you.
No.
So, Garrett, just sticking here with the buy and hold side, now that we've talked flips for a little bit, I'll say I'm a real estate investor that goes ahead and purchases more cash flowing property to put into my portfolio over time. And let's say I've worked myself up to 2, 3, 4, 5 rental properties. Now, I might start thinking, what should I do? What's more efficient? And what's the best trade-off for protection and even anonymity potentially as well? If I've got, say, 5 rental properties, do I put those all into one LLC, or does each property need its own separate LLC?
It's really a judgment call, Keith. It's what you're comfortable with in terms of risk. It's important to know if you have 5 properties in one LLC and a tenant sues over a claim at one property, they have a claim against the LLC that they rent from. If that LLC owns 5 properties, that claim allows them to get at the equity in all 5 rental properties within the LLC. So we don't want to create a target-rich LLC whereby a tenant on the inside attack can go after the equity in a lot of properties. It's a judgment call how many properties you put in one LLC. The safest, of course, is to have one property per LLC. And if you've got 4 other properties in LLCs outside of that one, the tenant can't reach the other properties on the outside. Now, for example, Keith, I have some clients that may have a couple of mobile homes, and the equity in the mobile home is only $10,000. Could you put 2 or 3 of the mobile homes in one LLC? Sure. Again, that's where it becomes a judgment call. What are you comfortable with? But when I teach my course around the country, Keith, the example we use is, would you have a $1 million free and clear home in the same LLC as a duplex that you rent to the Hells Angels?
Right.
So you wouldn't put those 2 in the same entity. All right. So you just have to mix and match and see what you're comfortable with.
That's right. So say, for example, as one has built up a 5-property rental portfolio, I'll say that they have some of that portfolio in Alaska, some of it in Georgia, and some of it in a third state, Alabama. Does it matter what state you form the LLC in? If someone's just listening to this for the first time, they might have that question. Tell us about that.
All right. Well, when you have a property in Alaska, to be on title, you're going to use an Alaska LLC. And the same is true in Georgia and Alabama. Now, you could have one Alaska LLC that would own the Alaska property, the Georgia property, and the Alabama property. The issue is you're going to have to pay the filing fees in all 3 states because you're doing business in 3 states, Alaska, Georgia, Alabama. So you've got one LLC, but you've got to pay the filing fees for 3 states. Well, once you set up the 3 separate LLCs, one for Alaska, one for the Georgia property, one for the Alabama property, you're paying the same amount in fees, but you have better protection. So for me, it's kind of a no-brainer. If you cross state lines, you're much better off just setting up an LLC in that state. So in your example, I would have an Alaska LLC, a Georgia LLC, an Alabama LLC. You're going to pay the same amount for 3 separate LLCs as you would for one operating in 3 states. Then you have those 3 LLCs owned by one Wyoming LLC. We like Wyoming. It provides great asset protection. There's an outside attack. Someone gets in a car wreck. It has nothing to do with the real estate. They want to get at the Georgia, Alabama, and Alaska properties, but they have to fight through Wyoming because that's what you owe, is the Wyoming LLC, which in turn owns the other 3 LLCs. Wyoming, the exclusive remedy is the charging order, which is a lien on distributions. It's very difficult for someone to get through that at the properties. They really can't. Wyoming also provides privacy. Your name does not appear on the state website for ownership of entities like so many other states. And once it's set up, the Wyoming entity is only $50 a year. So you have to look at this as another form of insurance. But for $50 a year and $125 for us to be the resident agent in Wyoming, you've got pretty good protection. This is not expensive or complicated to set up, and it's just really good protection.
So importantly, we're talking about the states that you, the listener, own your property in. For example, you might live in New Jersey, but if you have income property in Alaska, Georgia, and Alabama, we're talking about those states where you physically own the property itself, not where you reside. And then we're talking about Wyoming as a holding company, LLC, presiding over top of Alaska, Georgia, and Alabama. And now the attack has to come through that strong asset protection state of Wyoming before they can even get into those assets or that equity in your Alaska, Georgia, and Alabama properties.
Well put. That's exactly right.
Now, importantly, Garrett, it takes a little bit of time to go ahead and set this up in the front. And then, I think we can kind of be like a well-oiled machine and at Corporate Direct there, keep us informed of any changes that might happen over the years. And part of that is going ahead and kind of reducing our drag and our own administrative time that's put into this. So importantly, and I think something a lot of people don't understand, is when you set up a structure this way where you have your Wyoming LLC presiding over your Alaska, Georgia, and Alabama LLCs, you don't have to do a federal tax return for the Alaska, the Georgia, and the Alabama LLC. As long as you get it structured this way up front with the Wyoming LLC presiding as the holding company, you just have one federal tax return for that one Wyoming LLC.
That's absolutely correct. The Georgia, Alabama, and Alaska LLCs are considered single-member LLCs. The one member, the one owner, is Wyoming. So the tax obligation federally flows through to the Wyoming LLC. And you're absolutely right, Keith. You just have to file that one federal return for Wyoming. Everything shows up on the Wyoming return, thus saving you from having to do 4 returns. You're really only doing 1.
So some people listen to this and think, I don't know if I want to do all this. It sounds so complicated. Well, it doesn't really complicate your taxes that much when you do have that one Wyoming LLC presiding. You sort of pay your dues up front and get this established once, and there are some things to maintain, but it just gets so much easier after it's already set up.
Well, that's true. And also that your audit risk goes down significantly. If you're operating through LLCs versus having property in your individual name, your audit risk goes down by a factor of 5. The IRS appreciates if you're, for using these entities. In fact, they understand that a sophisticated investor is going to want to protect their assets. It makes sense that you would use LLCs. It shows that you're serious about your business, and the audit risk goes way down once you start using these LLCs.
In general, we avoid investing in coastal states. Again, this is just a generality because we just don't have those great ratios of rent income to purchase price, and we have laws that often favor tenants more so than favor landlords. So, Garrett, I know that there have been some changes that I heard about from you earlier in California, another wrinkle and another layer of regulation making things more difficult for California real estate investors. Tell us about that.
Yeah, there's a new case that came out of the California Supreme Court this summer. The case is called 926 North Ardmore Avenue, LLC versus the County of Los Angeles. And basically, when you sell a property or when you buy a property, there's a transfer tax. It's called the documentary transfer tax, and they've been collecting it in California, at least for 150 years. And it basically allows the county and the city to collect a tax upon the transfer of real estate. So, for example, in Los Angeles, if you have a $1 million property, the transfer tax is $5,600. In San Francisco, if you have a $5 million property, the transfer tax is $112,500. So that's pretty significant. Yeah. And, the city says, well, the buyer and seller share this, so it's only, $62,000. Well, big deal. That's a big hit. So people in California, in this case, didn't transfer the property via a deed. The title to the property was held in North Ardmore, LLC. They transferred the membership ownership of the LLC from the older generation to the younger generation. So if you went to the county, there was no deed transfer. The property stayed in the name of the LLC. It was just underneath it. The membership interest, the ownership interests were transferred. Well, the county found out about this and said, oh, no, when you transfer ownership interest in the LLC, even though there was no deed transferring it to the kids, when you transfer the ownership interest, that too triggers this transfer tax. And it shook the state. I mean, realtors are just going crazy because there's so many unanswered questions here. But basically now, if you have an LLC where you're doing estate planning and you're transferring the interest to the kids, the state is going to assert a transfer tax. And this is, for me, just another reason why you have to think long and hard about investing in California real estate. Sure, there's money to be made there, but you see a pattern of these types of rules coming out, and it's really for the benefit of the state workers and pensions. California has a $1 trillion unfunded pension liability, and because of that, they're engaging in these very unique and creative and frankly disturbing means of collecting more tax revenue. This is what you have to be aware of if you're investing in the state of California.
Oh, yeah, California, you got to love it. They always add some extra little wrinkle or layer or regulation or fee in there. And, some of my best memories in life have been on vacations to Yosemite or Death Valley or the beaches. It really is a beautiful state, but it's just not so great for real estate investors. California embodies the phrase, live where you want to live and invest where the numbers make sense, by Robert Helms, more so than any other state potentially. So, well, Garrett, we've talked about LLCs, limited liability companies. Why don't you talk to us about the distinctions, the differences, and the trade-offs of going ahead and using an LLC versus the LLP, a limited partnership? That's a question I get a lot of times.
Well, the LLC and the LP, if you're in the right states, both offer great asset protection. The charging order is a feature of both LLC and LP law. The issue is with the LP, you are required to have a general partner, at least one, and a limited partner, at least one. So you need two partners in it. The general partner is personally responsible for what happens within the LP. Like in a general partnership, the general partner has liability. Now, the way to skin the cat there is to have the general partner be a corporation or a different LLC. So to really be protected in an LP structure, you need to form two entities. The LP itself, you'll file with the state, and then you need to have the general partner be a corporation or an LLC, which requires forming that second entity. The LLC, everyone's protected. You only need to form one entity. So that's the main difference between the two. An argument in favor of the limited partnership is that the general partner with as little, for example, as 2% ownership can control the entire affairs of the LP, in which case, for example, mom and dad are the general partners. They own 2%. They've gifted 98% of the limited partnership interest to the kids. And with that 2% ownership as a general partner, they can control everything. The kids can't come to them and say, hey, mom and dad, we're getting the band together. We're going on the road. Sell the duplex. Mom and dad can say, no, we own 2% as general partners. We are not selling the assets of this limited partnership. So that's one little wrinkle advantage of it. In California, there's an extra tax on LLCs. They have a gross receipts tax on LLCs. So if you have a $10 million producing asset in California, you might use a limited partnership rather than an LLC because the state taxes are going to be lower. But that would be the two reasons why you would use an LP. Keith, nowadays, the vast majority of people use LLCs because you can get by with just that one entity.
Right. And I know in general, you recommend LLCs for buy and hold real estate investors.
That's true. That's the best way to go.
Now, what about the limits of the LLC? What if, say, I'm holding properties in my LLC and I die, I fall from a cliff in an Alaskan mountaineering accident? Will that LLC automatically be transferred over to my spouse, or not necessarily, or how does that work?
Well, it depends if you have a living trust or what your estate planning activities have been. Typically, we'll have, for example, in our structure with Alaska, Georgia, Alabama, owned by one Wyoming, the Wyoming LLC would in turn be owned by your living trust. Your living trust is an estate planning document whereby you don't have to go to court. You don't have to go through the probate process. The living trust would say who gets to own the Wyoming LLC. So they kind of work together. The LLCs offer the asset protection. The living trust offers the probate avoidance. And so if you don't have a living trust, if you're in a community property state, typically the spouse would come to own the interest. But, I think it's best as you grow and as you start having kids to have that living trust set up. They're only $2,000, $2,500 to set up, and it really keeps you out of court, which not only do the attorneys make out really well in these probate cases, but everything's a matter of public record. So everybody can find out what you own, and it's easier to stay out of the court system with a living trust.
So the living trust provides directions on what would happen to the assets in my Wyoming LLC after I die. Is that correct?
That's right.
Well, for years, you provided us real estate investors just a really valuable service with protection and maintenance of our corporate structures, and really not at an expense that's significant either. But there are some new rules out there that you stay on top of, so we need to tweak things from time to time. Tell us about the IRS's new rule and how we need to comply.
Well, Keith, this is really big. We don't want to change LLCs if we don't have to, but these new IRS rules require the amendment of LLC operating agreements and LP limited partnership agreements. The big change is this. Keith, I know you and your listeners are aware of some of these master limited partnerships that have 10,000 partners and 7 tiers of rights. They're very complicated structures. And the IRS just had a really difficult time auditing these because you've got to deal with 10,000 partners. People could come in and sue. The IRS didn't know exactly who to deal with in all cases. It was very difficult for the IRS to audit some of these large partnerships. And so what they did is said, we're not going to audit the individual partners anymore. We're going to audit the entity itself. And now the new rules say that the IRS can go directly to the entity, conduct an audit, and the partnership representative appointed by the entity is the only one that can interact with the IRS. They're not going to interact with 10,000 partners anymore. So if you're in the IRS's shoes, this makes a lot of sense. I mean,
Right.
If I ran the agency, I'd do the same thing too. But for partnerships, for LLCs and LPs, you now need to amend your operating agreement to opt into these new rules and appoint a partnership representative. This is the key here. The IRS will only deal with the person you've appointed. And that person can be a manager of the LLC, the general partner of the LP, but they have to have a substantial presence in the United States. So if you're an investor into the United States from overseas, you've got to have a U.S. person listed as the partnership representative. So the key thing is we got to amend all these agreements to appoint a partnership representative. The important thing to know is if you don't appoint a partnership representative in your documents, the IRS will appoint one for you. And this is not a good situation to be in. You don't want the IRS coming in and appointing someone you don't know or a partner who only has a small percentage of the investment to be the partnership representative. So we're going to all our clients and saying, look, for a very small, affordable fee, we can amend the operating agreement to appoint the partnership representative and deal with some of the technical issues involved. But if you don't do it, again, the IRS can appoint a person for you. That is not a good position to be in.
And there is a deadline in which this needs to be done.
You need to have this done by December 31st of this year. The new rules start January 1 of 2018.
So that is at the end of next month. Well, Garrett, you've been such an asset to real estate investors for so long, both with the education that you provide, with your books, and all of the asset protection along the way, so we can be out there and confidently build our portfolios while we protected ourselves and our family. Where can a real estate investor or other person begin with engaging Corporate Direct?
Well, you can go to corporatedirect.com. And we do have an article on these new IRS rules, so you can get all the information you need there about this new requirement. If you want a free 15-minute consult with one of our incorporating specialists, you can call 800-600-1760. We'll be happy to talk to you about our services and what you may or may not need to do. We try and make the information accessible, affordable, and we try and keep our clients up to date on these new rules. And, again, we don't like to have to amend every operating agreement if we don't have to. But this one from the IRS, this does require amendments to be made by the end of the year.
Personally, when it comes to taxes and asset protection, I do not go it alone. I really lean on professionals so I can be out there doing what I do best. CorporateDirect.com is where you want to start. Garrett Sutton, thanks so much for coming back on to Get Rich Education.
Thank you, Keith. It's been a pleasure.
Well, yeah, some simple, concise, and valuable information from Garrett Sutton. These structures aren't just about protection, but keep in mind that they often intersect with anonymity and with taxation as well. There are some trade-offs there. Setting this up with corporatedirect.com, it can take some of your mental bandwidth in the beginning. It probably will, even though they're helping you along. But the cost is lower than you might think. And when you get started over there, you're with the Rich Dad Advisor team. And if you mention Get Rich Education in my name, you get $100 off a corporate formation. Special thanks to Rich Dad Advisor Garrett Sutton. Thanks to you, the listener, that came out to New Orleans to chat with me in person. Remember to embrace what makes you weird. And part of that is the fact that you don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to Get Rich Education, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.